Hi booktube, this is Kelly. Thank you so much for watching my channel, Books I'm Not Reading. Today is February 26th. Unintentionally, I did not plan it this way, but today is Victor Hugo's birthday. He was born on February 26, 1802, and I think this is the perfect time to do a spoiler-free review of Les Miserables. I want to make it as spoiler-free as possible because I really want you to read this book. Some other people have been reading it on booktube recently, and then Sandy from Miss Reads a Lot. Les Miserables is actually her March selection for her book club, so I will try to leave a link to something like that, something related to Sandy's book club down below so that you can find out information. If you haven't picked a book for March of the Mammoths yet, yes, I highly recommend reading Les Miserables by Victor Hugo. So, before I get into the book, I just want to give you a little bit of context. Like, I really hadn't had much desire to read this book for a while, mainly because I love the musical. And when I say I love the musical, I mean the, stage production. Now, there is a film adaptation of the musical. There's also a miniseries and another movie. It's been made into films quite a few times. And if you'd like to see Jason and I do some reviews of the film adaptations of Les Miserables, let me know in the comments section, and if we do end up making it, I will leave a link to that video down below. I'm not sure when that would be, but I really felt like the best of Les Miserables must be in the musical, right? But I mean, the truth is, at the end of the day, when you look at a book like this, I mean, obviously the musical cannot include everything. And there were some really incredible scenes that you wouldn't be able to do on stage, that were, I was just enthralled with. I just couldn't put the book down at certain points. And there's a lot going on in the interior lives of the characters. So how do you show that in a musical? And not that you can't, but it takes time, and the musical is already it's already pretty long, right? Like, if two characters are going to tell each other they love each other, then that's at least one song. Victor Hugo started working on, and he had a working title for the book. He started working on it in 1845 and then stopped writing it in 1848. And due to political events in France, just set it aside. Then, when Napoleon III comes to power, Victor Hugo puts himself in self-imposed exile on an island off the coast of England, and he picks up this novel that he's been writing in 1860, and the book is published in 1862. So that is just an incredible turnaround time, I think, for a book of this size. My hardcover is 1,200 pages. I mean, you know, it's a huge book. And just to give you some context, you know, the other book that Victor Hugo is most famous for, the other novel, is The Hunchback of Notre Dame, which was published in 1831. So it's much earlier than Les Miserables. But I think what makes Les Miserables so interesting, one of the things that makes it so interesting, is that Victor Hugo is writing it in exile. And I think he has a lot that he wants to say to the people of France, and especially the people of Paris, about a lot of things, about slavery, about the poor, injustice, politics, and the history that France has gone through. So if you think about it, so the book is published in 1862. If you just look at the previous 100 years, less than 100 years of history in France, it has been a time of great upheaval. So 1789 is the French Revolution, right, where lots of heads are being cut off. The aristocracy is fleeing. That's 1789. The Battle of Waterloo is 1815. And then Napoleon gets sent to exile, and then he comes back, and then he gets sent back to exile again, and there's some other Napoleons, and there's a lot of questions, a lot of political questions about, what kind of government do we want to be? Do we want to have a king? Do we want to have an emperor? Do we want to be a republic? Whose voice should be deciding the fate of the people of France? One of the things that this book has really made me question is all of the other books that I've previously read in translation. There are a variety of translations of Les Miserables. So there's this one, which I'm sure was published as a result of the musical, and it was translated by Lee Fabenstock, Norman McAfee, but it's based on the classic C.E. Wilbur translation, which I don't know when that came out. This was published in the 80s. And then my hardcover was published in 2008, and it is translated by Julie Rose, who I thought did an excellent job of translating. But again, the difference between the two translations was interesting. I don't think I would have loved the book as much if I had just read this. And I only got this because I wanted something that was easier to carry around than this. But I just didn't like this translation as much. So I do have a paragraph here to share with you that is, so you can kind of see the difference in translations. Now, a lot of people recently on BookTube have been talking about a translation, and I apologize, I don't know what her last name is. I know her first name is Christine, and it is supposed to be the most modern translation of Les Miserables. So this is a section, I'm just going to read you a paragraph from a section about kind of young boy, street urchin characters. So here we go. So this is the older translation. In the evening, by the means of the few pennies he always manages to scrape together, the homuncio sees some of the theater. Merely by crossing that magic threshold, he is transfigured. He was a gamin. He becomes a TT. Theaters are a sort of ship turned upside down in the bilges at the top. The TT pile into this hold. The TT is to the gamin what the butterfly is to the grub, the same creature, but soaring on high. It is enough for him to be there with his radiant delight, his power of enthusiasm and joy, and his applause like the beating of wings to make those bilges, close, dark, fetid, filthy, unwholesome, hideous, and detestable, a real paradise. Okay, and so this is the 2008 translation. So, of an evening, thanks to the few sous he's always managed to scrape together for himself, this homuncio steps into a theater. In crossing that magic threshold, he is transfigured. He was a gutter snipe. He becomes a cocky Parisian theater goer. Theaters are like upside-down ships with the hold up on top. It is up into this hold that this artful dodger piles. Now, Oliver Twist has been published at the time, that Les Miserables was published, okay? The cocky Parisian theater goer is to the gamin what the moth is to the grub, the same creature taking wing and soaring. All he has to do is be there with his radiant happiness, with his powerful enthusiasm and joy, with his hands clapping like beating wings for this cramp-fetid, dark, sordid, insalubrious, awful, abominable hold to turn into paradise, the gods. So for me, this gigantic edition of Les Miserables, the translation just felt like it had kind of more oxygen in it. I felt like I could breathe a little bit more with this than with the older translation, and I hardly read any. You know, occasionally I would compare what was in this translation to the one that I have. Now, I will say there were 3 times I felt like Julie Rose was a little too modern. There is a scene with our main character, Jean Valjean, and Javert, another character, comes to see him, and Jean Valjean says, "What's up, Javert?" And I was like, really don't think at this, the early 19th century France, that anyone is going to use the expression, "What's up?" There was another case where someone zoomed away, so again, I think that was maybe taking it a little bit too far, but again, I mean, look at the size of this book. In 1,200 pages, there were maybe 3 times where I felt like it was too modern. The other thing that I really like about this translation are the endnotes. Now, this translation that doesn't have any endnotes and has very, very few footnotes. But this edition has a lot of endnotes, and I know we had a conversation on my channel about do endnotes, do they take us out of the story? Do footnotes take us out of the story? Do annotations take us out of the story? And for me, it was really good because it helped me understand the context of what Victor Hugo was saying so much better. So one of the chapters is about Paris in 1817. And honestly, I don't think I've ever read a chapter with so many notes to it. In one sentence, there could be 4 endnotes. And that's because Victor Hugo was talking about real people. He was talking about people that his audience would have known who those people were. And it was fascinating because some of the notes in that, time, we have lost whoever that person was. But the people, Victor Hugo was writing to the people who are living in France in 1862, and they would have known who all those people were. They wouldn't have needed any notes, they would have got it. And he was really trying to speak to them, I think. So yeah, I mean, it was a lot of notes. I will give Julie Rose credit though. So there was one expression that was used the first time. There was an end note explaining what it was. The second time it was used, there was a note saying, look at this previous note. The third time it was used, no note at all whatsoever. She just expected you to remember and to move forward with that. So I found them very helpful. And again, it gave me a lot of context to the book. Now, the story itself. I think Les Miserables, which sounds in our modern language like the miserables, right? The outcasts. The first part of the word misérable is related to another French word that means the merciful. And I think at the crux of this book is the contrast between the miserable and the merciful, and people gaining redemption and people finding redemption, and people people getting redemption who don't deserve it, in our eyes, at least as the reader. So that's what really, to me, it was at the heart of the whole story, is, you know, these people who are miserable, and other people see the good in them. Sometimes it takes a while, and some people are never good. They just aren't. They are evil till the last page. The book starts off with a character who, if you've seen the musical, or the musical film adaptation, like, it starts off with a character who is a bishop. The book, and that character is a very minor character in the musical, but I quickly learned, once I started reading this, that Victor Hugo was in no rush. He was in no hurry. I mean, he must have been writing tremendously. Like, he must have been writing a lot in that period of time. I don't know how much of the book was done when he set it down in 1848, but to pick it up in 1860 and have it be published by 1862 is phenomenal. So the bishop, though. So we start off with the bishop, and you quickly realize, like I said, that Victor Hugo, he's not hurrying along. He wants to take his time. He wants us to understand these characters. And he shows us just how the bishop is just an incredible character. He is so good. He is so good. And his goodness really sets the tone for the rest of the book. He makes one action that is life-changing for our main character, Jean Valjean. And but it was interesting at the beginning. I was like, oh, all right, the bishop, okay, like, Jean Valjean's gonna show up soon. And no, like, we went on and on with the life of this bishop. But it was wonderful. It was great. And all of the main core characters of the book, you feel like you really, really know them, as well as I felt like, and I don't know, those of you who have read it, I really want to know what you guys think down below. But I felt like I knew Victor Hugo too at the end of the book. And by the end of the book, I didn't want to leave that world. I didn't want to leave Victor Hugo. I didn't want to leave these characters. Because I was so vested in all of the stories that are happening. And one of the things that I love about the musical is the way that the music is all, like, connected. Like, a part of one song ends up being like the main theme of another song later on. And I loved that kind of interconnectedness of the music. But in Les Miserables, the book, the characters, they all have these incredible connections that it's only if you read all of it that you would know. Now, there were definitely, sections of the book where I feel like Victor Hugo is trying to speak to the people of France and the people of Paris specifically. And so he takes us to Waterloo. And I feel like there was a reason. There was a reason that he wanted to talk about Napoleon. He wanted to talk about what went wrong in that battle. He went to the battle scene the year before this was published to make sure that he got it right. And the battlefield itself had changed. But it's a very compelling story. It was an incredible battle, and it really hinged on just a few small things, like, who had the better scout, those sorts of things. But there is something that happens at the end of Waterloo that is very, very important for the whole rest of the book. and it's just this little small tiny thing at the end of the battle. I did look to see how long Waterloo was in this edition, and it's at most 55 pages. You know, again, in a 1,200 page book, I don't really, that's really not that much to go through. Is the reading a little bit slower at those times? Yes, it takes a little bit more, because frankly, he creates such wonderful fictional characters that we are always wanting to go back. We're always wanting to go back to them. There's a whole section about slang, which is fascinating. But again, you know, Victor Hugo is writing this toward the end of his career. I mean, he's 60 years old when this book comes out. And he's been a very famous poet and playwright. He's achieved a lot of success, novelist. So I think he was just like, you know what, those people criticize me for using slang, so I want to talk about that now. I want to talk about the use of slang and that it's broader than, you know, what I was being criticized for using, the definition of slang. There was another, well, so in addition to being sort of quote unquote warned about the section on Waterloo, somebody else told me like, oh, you are going to understand everything about the Paris sewer system. Like, good luck, Kelly. But the sewer system at the time that events are taking place in the sewer in this novel, like the sewer system was undergoing a huge, its own revolution, if you will. Someone had come and said, you know, the sewer system just wasn't working in Paris, which does not surprise me at all. And so this guy came and, he ended up being able to, you know, make maps of the sewer and figure out a way to get things to, you know, it's all slanted, right, toward the river. And Victor Hugo has strong thoughts about what should be done with what's in the sewer and what actually is in the sewer too, which was quite graphic. But you know, it's important to understand the sewer system because of what happens in the book and because it's happening at the same time. It is the same, you know, they really start making major changes to the sewer like 6 months before the events that in the book that take place in the sewer system. So I felt it was really relevant. Again, like, are those sections, do you just fly through them? No, you don't. But that doesn't mean that they're not important. That doesn't mean that they're not relevant. I think Victor Hugo was very, very focused on who his audience was going to be in that moment and wanted to talk about those things. And I don't have any, like, it's a book unlike any other book I've ever read. I mean, I don't know anyone else. I've never read anything like this. There's this golden thread going through the novel, and occasionally Victor Hugo shifts away from that golden thread, but when we come back to the thread itself, it's that much richer. It's that much more complex. The connections between the characters are clearer. So the other thing I wanted to mention is that I'm not going to say Victor Hugo is Anthony Trollope. They're very, very different writing styles. But Victor Hugo does talk to the reader just the way Trollope does. And I loved that about him. I love that he was brave enough to do that. There were a couple places that I marked. Here we will refrain from adding our own personal theories. We are merely the narrator, putting ourselves in Jean Valjean's shoes, seeing with his eyes and translating his impressions. And then there is a character who stutters, okay? So we have indicated to stop Toussaint's stutter once and for all. Please permit us not to dwell on it any further. We draw the line at musical notation of disability. So I just thought that was like, because initially when that character would speak, Victor Hugo would include a stutter, and then after that note, whenever the character speaks, it's straight. We don't have the stutter. We still know that character has a stutter, but Victor Hugo just didn't want to keep dwelling on it. And that actually reminds me of it. Like I think on the surface it might seem crazy that anyone would want to make a musical of Les Miserables, but the characters are singing all the time. The characters are singing. The characters are quoting poetry to each other. It's a book with a lot of that in it. So I thought that, whistling and things like that. So that was fun too. I was really trying to find references to the songs, that are in the musical, and of course, no, that's not how it works. When I finished this book, and of course, because I've seen the musical, I know how the book ends. But the way Victor Hugo wrote how the ending comes about was so heartbreaking. I was just sobbing. I was sobbing for the last 30 pages of this book. I was crying. Jason, my husband, came in at one point and he was like, are you okay? And I said, go away. So if you haven't read this book, I would encourage you to give it a try. And there is an opportunity coming up to read it with a group of people. I would also really recommend trying a few pages of whatever translation you're planning to read and make sure that it feels like a good fit for you. And I would be curious to read a different the other more modern, more recent translation of Les Miserables in the future. But yeah, this is such a special book, you guys. It's just a really, really special book. If you have read Les Miserables, I would love to hear what you thought of it in the comments section down below. If you haven't, but you're planning to, you can let me know that as well. I hope this video was helpful. And I hope I've inspired you to give this book a go in the future. If you don't feel comfortable leaving a comment, you can leave the French flag or another emoji, or you can give this video a thumbs up. Thank you so much for watching BookTube. Remember to be kind to yourself and be kind to others. I will talk to you soon. Take care. Bye.